The chorus of the hymn goes, "Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I've needed, your hand has provided. Great is your faithfulness, God, unto me." Do you see new mercies morning by morning? If not, how? How does that happen in this life? But I'd ask the same question if you do. How? How in that life does it happen, in this life? It happens when we have the eyes to see that God continually makes ordinary things like water or like a loaf of bread and a cup of juice, extraordinary. That's what we're going to explore this morning. So as we prepare for the word preached, would you join with me, your hearts and minds, in prayer? O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be found acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So, it's just water. It's just water, right? And of course, immediately as I say that, somebody will say, no, it's not just water. There's water from Hawaii, and there's water from New York. There's water from all over the world. Here, it's not just water. And yet it is. It's just water. And yet, for 2,000 years, we have been telling this story of how Jesus showed up one day on the banks of a river and looked at his cousin John and said, "Will you baptize me? Will you do something with the ordinary stuff of this life to remind me of God's grace and love?" And when he was willing to participate in that ordinary moment of water being poured over his head, like he was taking a bath, right? Suddenly, this God who could not wait to be with us tore open the heavens and said, "This is my child, with whom I am well pleased." So we've been telling and enacting that story for 2,000 years. And so little Miranda, so incredibly proud of herself, I did not know that was coming in that way, stood up here and declared her name. "My name is Miranda Louise Isaacs." And we did the same thing. We put ordinary water on her head. And in that moment, God tore open the heavens to be with her and to be with me and to be with you. God is with us every day, in every moment. Whether bidden or unbidden, God is with us, the ancients say. And yet sometimes we forget, and so we do these things to remind ourselves that God is here. And yet, if it were only a practice of memory, well, then it wouldn't be that powerful, right? There's something else that happens in the invocation of God's name. And an invocation is merely a moment when we invite God to be with us. But that seems counterintuitive, yes? Because if God is always with us, then what business do we do inviting God to be with us? God's already here. Well, I've come to believe that an invocation is really that moment when we remind ourselves that God is here. God is present among us. And in those moments, ordinary things, like the plain old water that we poured from the tap, become this extraordinary conduit of God's love and grace. Next Sunday, Pastor Emily Lebrecq will stand in this chancel with me, and I will take off this ordinary piece of cloth. And you say to yourself, well, that's not ordinary, Leah, that's one of your stoles. Exactly. Again, it's an ordinary thing made extraordinary by the meaning that we assign to it and by the way in which we invite God to be present among us. That these things, these stoles that I wear, they're not scarves, as some of the lovely ladies in my last congregation used to call them. I love your scarf today, Pastor. Well, thank you. It always made me want to throw it over my shoulder like this. It's not a scarf, it's a stole. It's in the shape of a mantle. It's in the shape of that thing that hook on farm animals to yoke them together so that they could go and do their work. And so every time I put on this ordinary piece of fabric, it becomes extraordinary because it's a reminder of my ordination, that I am yoked to Christ in serving you, this church. But next week, I will take it off, and I will pass the mantle to Emily, and she will put it on as this outward and visible sign of this inward covenant that we keep with one another. That you covenant with me that I will serve you as your pastor, and yet next week you release me from that covenant for 3 months so that I can go rest and renew my tired soul. Ordinary things made extraordinary. But we decided over a year ago together that this time of renewal shouldn't just be ordinary time. It shouldn't just be a vacation. No, we were going to be intentional about how that renewal happened. I wanted to spend those 3 months focusing on spiritual practices. And all a spiritual practice is a moment when you do an ordinary thing. You invoke the name of God and invite God to be part of it. So I want to ask you, what spiritual practice will you keep over the next 3 months? What will you explore? Every time you pour yourself a glass of water, will you pause for a moment and invite God to be present in the refreshment that brings you? Every morning, will you wake up and say, "Hi, God, it's me. What do you want me to do today?" Will you show up today, God? I'd like to see you. Will you pause before a meal, before the ordinary bread on your sandwich, and remember the extraordinary way in which Jesus took ordinary bread and broke it and said, "This is my body, broken for you"? Before you go out for a run or a bike ride, or you go to yoga class, will you pause and say, "God, as I breathe, remind me that your very spirit is the Ruach, is the living breath. Come and be with me in these moments." Every time you look at your Outlook calendar, will you say to God, "I choose Kairos today over Chronos. Help me shape my time so that I can serve you"? What ordinary thing do you do in your everyday life that you can offer to God? What practice will you keep? Even on the days when you don't feel like doing it, that's the point of a practice, that we continue to practice it. So that, as the ancients say, when we do not have the words pray us instead. Ordinary things made extraordinary by the very grace of God. What practice will you keep? Amen.